Before anyone ever called it haunted, this island already knew death. Before the stories, before the whispers, before the legends, there was a simpler truth. This was the place where Europe sent people it did not want to see die. This was where the sick were taken not to be cured, but to be removed. This was where names stopped mattering, where bodies outnumbered prayers, where fire worked faster than mercy. They arrived by boat, quietly, usually at night, carrying the infected, the suspected, the inconvenient. And when those boats left, they left empty. No return trips, no survivors, no explanations. The city stayed clean because this island absorbed the filth. The living stayed calm because this island absorbed the fear. Over time, the ground here stopped being just ground. It became a mixture of soil and ash and silence. And then something else happened. When the plague was gone, the island did not return to life. It was reused, repurposed, filled again. This time with people whose minds frightened society more than disease ever had. And when even that ended, when the doors closed and the bells stopped ringing, the island was not destroyed. It was simply abandoned, left behind as if forgetting it might finally bury what had been done. Poveglia does not need ghosts to feel heavy. It is heavy because it remembers what the rest of the world chose to forget. When the plague came to Venice, it did not knock politely. It did not ask permission. It arrived carried by ships, by rats, by breath, and within weeks, it turned one of the richest cities in Europe into a place ruled by terror. Doctors did not understand it. Priests could not pray it away. And the government, desperate to protect what remained of the living, made a decision that would stain the lagoon forever. They needed somewhere to put the infected, not to cure them, not to comfort them, but to remove them from sight. And so the boats began to move, slowly, quietly, under cover of fear. They carried men, women, children, some coughing, some already too weak to stand, some not even sick yet, only suspected. And suspicion was enough. The destination was a small island in the Venetian Lagoon, Poveglia. No hospitals, no proper shelters, just land, and the understanding that once you stepped onto it, you were no longer part of the city. You were a problem being handled. People arrived expecting treatment. They found waiting. Waiting for fever. Waiting for silence. Waiting for death. There were no proper burials. There was no time. There was no space. Bodies piled faster than prayers could be spoken. They were burned because fire was faster than compassion, and ash was easier to manage than grief. Day after day, boats returned empty. They never brought anyone back. And slowly, a truth settled into the minds of the people of Venice. Poveglia was not a quarantine island. It was a destination for disappearance. If you were sent there, you were already considered dead. The living pretended you were gone. The city moved on. And on that island, among the smoke and the cries and the unanswered questions, the first layer of something heavy settled into the soil. Not just ash, not just bone, but the knowledge that when fear grows strong enough, entire populations can agree to look away. Long after the last plague boat stopped coming, long after Venice convinced itself the nightmare was over, the island remained silent. And silence has a way of preserving things. People like to imagine history as something buried neatly beneath layers of time. But on this island, time did not cover anything. It is no largely in this island, but indivited some side of signs. But on this island, time did not hover themselves. People like to imagine history as something buried neatly beneath layers of time, but on this island, time did not cover anything. Something vibrates as a relieve it. Long this island, time did compressed it. The fires that burned the dead burned for years, until the air itself learned the smell. And when there was no more room for flames, the remains were pushed into pits, covered quickly, carelessly, because speed mattered more than dignity. Over time, the soil changed, not visibly, not in a way you could photograph, but in a way you could feel beneath your feet. Locals began to say the ground here was different, but it was softer, that it gave way too easily, that it was no longer just earth, but a mixture of ash and fragments and memory. They said crops would not grow properly. They said animals refused to stay. They said the island felt unfinished, as if it had swallowed too much and never learned how to digest it. And the most unsettling part was not the exaggeration, it was the logic. Because when thousands of bodies are reduced to smoke, and that smoke settles, and that settling repeats itself year after year, eventually the land stops being neutral. It becomes mortable, they mats become. It was the lodge, but as well. And the past that the bodies up of was large, and that sperry of spoons, and the long. It becomes known lodge, and this is one of the islands its fell they air. It becomes several, and the possible feature. The long stopped was being neutral, and they said it won. A step of the most one boy, by Fernda spoke to prive the lands they were devoif. Because when thousands of bodies are reduced to smoke, and that smoke settled bit in battle, it was no long just a smoke and the rolled in the roan. Eventually the land settled bitin down. It becomes below that was long, not in logic. Of his lever, it was befused. The land must ground before the short, because when they did to revival was nokely the land pier. It becomes lun, they becomes newt, and the suffer, many island and flives, the god and mand. The birther had not work, and this lined not going flirt, and they sought befert. But that still be way. It settled to be abbot, and this light one sketch back. It was not live to sleep, and the long the dead had vive. Something before they did not. And it was possible the land stared for long, and anyone to praise. Of the past that land won, it becomes a record. No gravestones, no names, just a surface, carrying the weight of everyone who vanished without being counted. And when people walked here, they did not speak of spirits. They spoke of pressure, of unease, of a sense that the island was holding something down, that every step pressed against a past that never received permission to rest. When disease was no longer the threat, the island did not empty. It changed purpose. Because society had learned something useful, Poveglia was effective. It removed problems quietly. So when fear shifted from bodies to minds, the island was ready. A psychiatric facility was established, far from the city, far from families, far from accountability. People sent here were not always violent, not always dangerous, but they were inconvenient. They did not fit, they did not behave. And on an island already defined by isolation, control became easy. The patients were watched, they were studied, they were experimented on, not necessarily out of cruelty, but out of certainty. The certainty that no one was coming, no one was listening. No one would question what happened behind those walls. Stories later emerged, never fully documented, never officially confirmed, but repeated often enough to form a shape. A doctor obsessed with understanding madness,
a belief that the human mind could be forced back into order. A bell tower overlooking the wards, used not just to mark time, but to remind those inside how far away the world had gone. Screams were reported, not constant, just enough to be remembered. And when the hospital finally closed, when the staff left and the patients were transferred or forgotten, the equipment stayed, the rooms stayed. The island was left exactly as it was, as if freezing the moment might prevent questions from forming. And so Poveglia did what it had always done. It absorbed another layer, another group, erased not by illness, but by neglect. And once again, the solution was the same. Close the doors, stop visiting, pretend it is over.
There is a bell tower on the island, standing taller than the rest of the ruins, visible even from the water. And bells are meant to do one thing. They mark time. They divide days into something understandable. But on this island, time never behaved properly. The bell here was not for celebration. It was not for prayer. It was for order, for control, for reminding those below that something was always watching. Some say it rang when patients refused treatment. Some say it rang at night when there was no schedule left to follow. And some say it never rang at all, that the sound people remember came from something else entirely. But what matters is not whether the stories are accurate. What matters is that people remember them. And memory, when shared often enough, becomes heavier than fact. Fishermen avoided the waters nearby. Boats changed course without being told to. The tower stood, and still stands, as a marker, not of madness, not of ghosts, but of authority unchecked. A place where sound traveled one way, downward, never answered. And when the bell finally stopped, when silence replaced it completely, the silence did not feel like peace. It felt like something unfinished, as if the island had lost the ability to announce anything at all. Today, Poveglia remains closed, not officially erased, just quietly ignored. No restoration projects, no museums, no carefully worded plaques explaining the tragedy. There are easier histories to sell, easier places to remember. And so the island sits between Venice and the open lagoon, visible but unreachable, acknowledged only in passing, like a thought people choose not to finish. This is why it feels different from other abandoned places. Not because of what might be there, but because of what was never resolved. There was no apology, no reckoning, no moment where someone said, "This should not have happened." The island was used until it was full, and then it was left. That is the true haunting. Not spirits wandering corridors, but the knowledge that entire systems can discard human beings and continue functioning as if nothing was lost. Poveglia does not ask for your attention. It does not invite you in. It waits. And in that waiting, it tells its final story. Not of death, but of forgetting. Because the most frightening thing about this island is not what people believe still lingers there. It is how easily the world learned to move on.